People are demanding the regime's downfall. This was the slogan that kicked off the protests in Syria at the beginning of 2011. These protests quickly spread across the entire country and eventually escalated into a full-scale war that led to the fall of the regime. Today, the whole world follows the news from Syria. But amid the endless stream of reports, the most crucial question often goes unanswered. How did this happen? How did a nation and an entire region find themselves in such a dire situation? What are the root causes of this conflict? Bashar al Assad, whose speeches were widely quoted at the time, claimed that he was facing a group of rats and bandits. But as it turned out, the well-equipped and heavily armed Syrian army, which was loyal to the government, couldn't handle these so-called bandits. Why? Because, as it turns out, on the other side, there was far more than a group of rats. There were much more serious forces. What were these forces? Where did they come from? And what did they want? To understand all of this, we need to look back in history. For a long time, the Ottoman Empire was the bastion of Islam, the principal Islamic state, encompassing many Arab lands. Among these were Egypt, Syria, with its capital in Damascus, Palestine, Lebanon, Iraq, and other modern-day countries of the region. After the Ottoman Empire's defeat in World War I, its territories were divided among the Allied powers. In Europe, the idea of a nation's right to self-determination was popular at the time, but when it came to Arab countries, European leaders conveniently forgot about this principle. Instead, they came up with a clever concept called mandates. As a result, the League of Nations, following the Paris Peace Conference, granted Britain mandates over Palestine and Iraq, while France received mandates over Lebanon and Syria. As is often the case, the borders were drawn neatly with rulers in distant offices. You won't find such straight borders in Europe, for instance, but in Africa or on the lands of the former Ottoman Empire, borders were created in European cabinets far removed from the realities on the ground. This created and continues to create numerous conflicts. But the problem wasn't just about borders drawn with rulers. The French decided to divide Syria into several autonomous entities. Even at that time, the French administration singled out the Alawites, who lived in the Latakia province, as a separate group. This would play a significant role years later, when an Alawite named Hafez al Assad seized power. Who are the Alawites? The majority of Muslims in the world are Sunnis. However, there are countries like Azerbaijan and Iran, where the majority of the population are Shia. In Syria, Sunnis make up 74% of the population, while Shia only account for 12%. Nearly all Shia in Syria, about 10% of the population, belong to a strange and still poorly understood Muslim sect called the Alawites. The Alawites, for example, celebrate Christmas and Easter, and in their interpretation of Islam, one can discern a concept similar to the Christian Trinity. They believe that humans existed before creation, and that they looked like light and fire. That is, God did not create humans, but simply gave them form. Along with the humans, their sins also took on form. Before that, the sins were shapeless, but once they took shape, they became demons, devils, and women. It's safe to say that this is a fairly marginal sect. Throughout history, it was practiced by the lowest social classes. During the Ottoman Empire, it was the cleaners, trash collectors, and other workers doing the dirtiest jobs. And when Syria gained independence in 1946 and needed its own armed forces, the Alawites rushed into the military to escape poverty. Under the Ottoman Empire, all officers were Turks. Arabs did not enter the army to make a career out of it. Arabs fought only as enlisted soldiers. They didn't go to military academies. A respectable Arab, if he wanted to make a career and be successful, would become a doctor or a lawyer. That was the career path for a good young Arab. The Alawites, however, had no opportunities to advance in either civilian or military life. So when independent Syria began to build its army, the Alawites joined. For them, it was the only way to make a career, climb the social ladder, and escape poverty. The army became their opportunity to reach a level that had previously been unattainable. In the 1940s to 1960s, during a period of constant coups, the Alawites took key positions in the military. By 1970, they had effectively monopolized the officer corps. It was during this time, amid another military coup, that Hafez al Assad, from a poor Alawite family, came to power. Why not? In Syria, all the coups were carried out by the military, and all the top officers were Alawites. What could anyone oppose to them? They had all the power. So the Alawites, whose support ensured Assad's rise, took control. This was the literal embodiment of the saying, "Those who were nothing shall become everything." Assad himself didn't always dream of being a dictator. In fact, he didn't always dream of being a soldier. Young Hafez al Assad dreamed of becoming a doctor, but being a soldier was cheaper, offered more opportunities, and had clearer prospects. And like many Alawites of that time, Hafez chose a military career. He was the first in his family to finish school and get an education. His father was from a small Syrian village, and during colonial rule, worked for the French. This helped him improve his situation, and in order to reflect his improved social status, he changed his peasant surname from Al-Wash, meaning wild beast, to Al-Assad, meaning lion. Later, all the Assads would be very proud of their royal-sounding surname, while their opponents would mock them and remind everyone that their name wasn't authentic. After staging a military coup and becoming president, Hafez al Assad concentrated all power in his hands. He knew he was relying on a minority, and thus couldn't afford to be democratic. He destroyed what remained of democratic institutions and maximized the president's powers. In other words, his own powers. This is when the personality cult began. Streets, squares, parks, libraries, and schools, everything was named after him, and statues and busts of the officially adored president stood everywhere. Hafez al Assad knew that the era of military coups had to end, and to do that he needed the authority of the state, a personality cult, repression, and the elimination of dissenters. Understanding that despite all the statues and portraits in every institution, his power was still based on support from a minority, Assad ruled with extreme cruelty. Prisons, camps, and persecution. There was, however, another option for those who disagreed: leave the country forever. The opposition, mainly Sunnis, still rejected the regime, considering it unacceptable for the country to be ruled by an Alawite minority. But not only Hafez al Assad understood that he relied on a minority. The new Alawite elite, those former officers, now ministers, leaders, And masters of Syrian life also realized that they were a minority, representatives of a minority. They understood that if the Assad family fell, they would be swept away by the Syrian people, and their power and prosperity would come to an end. This is why Hafez al Assad succeeded in passing all the power onto his son, Bashar al Assad. Of course, there were some discontented voices within the Alawite elite, questioning what kind of monarchy this was. But they grumbled and swallowed it. Without the Assads, there would be nothing. Initially, it was planned that the eldest son, Bassel al Assad, would take over, and he was being groomed to be a tough ruler, to govern with an iron fist. His moral qualities were also quite suitable. In terms of cruelty, willpower, and unyielding nature, he surpassed his father. But it didn't work out. In the middle of his preparation, Bassel al Assad died in a car accident. This matched his explosive, fearless nature, speeding and losing control. This left Bashar al Assad, who was suddenly summoned from London. Bashar had not been prepared to rule the country. In London, he had been pursuing a career as an ophthalmologist, following the path his father once dreamed of. After all, this was already the second generation of Alawites in independent Syria, and they could choose their careers without being limited to the military. Besides, Bashar al Assad spoke both English and French, led a fairly quiet life, and certainly didn't think or expect such a situation to fall upon him. But when life throws you into such circumstances, there's nothing to be done. Bashar returned to Syria, joined the army, and made a rapid career, rising to the rank of general in just a few years. Naturally, all Syrian media reported that who would have thought Bashar al Assad was a brilliant strategist and tactician, and that his meteoric rise was not because he was the dictator's son, but because he was simply a military genius. Anyone who didn't like this narrative was either shot or imprisoned. In fact, it was Bashar's father who decided that for his young son, a new, younger elite would need to be created. The existing elite were the seasoned military officers who had carried out the coup with Hafez. They would hardly believe in the military genius of the London-trained ophthalmologist. So a new Alawite Syrian elite version 2.0 was hastily formed. Of course, many of them were the children of the father's allies, but they were younger, less experienced, and already fully indebted to the future young dictator. The transfer of power went as planned, and it all started over again. Squares and boulevards were named after Assad Jr. Statues of him were erected in every city, and his portraits appeared on every wall. But the personality cult doesn't always help. Even under the first Assad in 1982, a Sunni organization in the city of Hama raised a revolt. They took control of the city, declaring that they no longer recognized the central authority. Assad's response was brutal. He ordered artillery bombardment of Hama, essentially leveling the city to the ground. The revolt was suppressed, and tens of thousands of people were killed. This episode, known as the Hama massacre, demonstrated the regime's willingness to go to extreme measures to maintain power. This was the first red flag. The rule of the minority, which raised its hand against the Sunni majority from the Sunni perspective, had to be overthrown. The second red flag came with the Arab Spring, when Bashar al Assad, the son of Hafez al Assad, followed in his father's footsteps and opened fire on protesting Sunnis. From that moment, the fate of the Assad family was sealed, and their downfall became only a matter of time. It should be noted that Bashar al Assad did not resort to the use of force immediately. At first, he even made some concessions to the protesters. For example, he lifted the state of emergency in the country. This law had been in place for almost 50 years, since the first military coups in the early years of Syria's independence. But this effort was futile. On April 22nd, security forces opened fire on protesters, resulting in mass casualties. Predictably, all European nations and the United States condemned Assad. They weren't fans of his regime to begin with. The U.S., in particular, had long-standing grievances with Syria's Ba'athist government, given that the same Ba'ath party had once ruled Iraq under Saddam Hussein. Accusations had been flying for years. Syria was allegedly hiding Iraqi weapons of mass destruction and aiding Iraq by selling arms in violation of sanctions. But Assad's real problem wasn't the West. What do they know anyway? From Syria's perspective, the opinions of infidels who don't understand the country's unique dynamics hardly mattered. Sanctions? Syria had seen plenty of those before. They'd survived these too. The far graver issue was how the events of spring 2011 were perceived by other Arab nations. The majority of Arabs in the world are Sunni, and to them, the optics were damning. A group of Alawite soldiers firing on crowds of unarmed Sunnis. That image was far more damaging than any European or American disapproval. Naturally, after such events, no Sunni Arab nation supported Assad. His only ally in the region was Shiite Iran, which itself faced significant challenges within the Arab world. Domestically, the backlash to the crackdown on protesters was swift. In 2011, the Free Syrian Army was established by Sunni deserters from the government forces. They declared that the regime had discredited itself by turning its guns on their fellow Syrians, and that it had to be overthrown. Yes, the top ranks of the Syrian military were dominated by Alawites, but the bulk of the army? Sunnis. After all, someone had to serve in the armed forces, and Sunnis made up the overwhelming majority of Syria's population. Later, more radical groups would split off from the Free Syrian Army. All this, combined with the international situation and the dynamics in the Arab world, will lead, by the end of 2024, to the inevitable collapse of Assad's regime and the Alawites, and the beginning of a new chapter in the country's history. One can only hope it will be a more peaceful one. What do you think about the situation in Syria? Could the conflict have been avoided, and what does the future hold for Syria? Share your thoughts in the comments.